first high-level overview of Python here, right? Python is a coding language giving us the ability to write scripts that can tell our computer what to do in binary, right? Ones and zeros. Now to do that, we're going to need some very basic data types, right? As I think about computer programs, I think about inputs. We do some work with those inputs, and then we generate outputs. And we see here, right, I have the ability to store numbers, right? We see I have the number 4 right here, right? So any example of this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Very simple. Strings. Strings are very legible to you and I, right? This is very helpful for us later on, especially as we get into things like print statements, right? So we see here I've stored my very first string. We have something called lists, right? In other languages, we call these arrays. And in our lists, we can store things like numbers, but multiple sets of numbers. We see here in our first list that we've created 1, 2, 3, 4, and even -5 have ended up in here. We have something called dictionaries, which give us what we refer to as key value pairs, right? So here I see I have key 1. If I was to look up in this dictionary key 1, I would get a result of value 1 here as an example. We have the ability to set up things like logic for Booleans, right? I can set this variable to be true or false, so I can do things based on if a statement is true, then do something else. Right? We have tuples in Python, which give us the ability to store multiple items within a single variable. And finally, sets. Right? Sets are somewhat similar to dictionaries. They have fast lookups. They can't have duplicates in them. And we're going to get into this. Let's just go ahead and jump in now and run our very first program. So first things first, I'm going to run this cell. We're using Colab here. Very simplistic Jupyter type environment. I can run my code cell by cell. So that's what we've done. I've now stored these variables. Numbers is equal to 4. I have a string here. List, I've declared this list. And we're going to run now our very first program now that we stored some of these variables. We're going to come back to some of these data types down the line here, but let's get started here, right? So I have something called a print statement. And if I run this, right, we can see here that I have now printed out a string, right? The value we have stored for the variable numbers is, and then I've called some sort of function that's going to help me pull this out, right? The number 4, okay? Now that we have this, we have the ability to print things out. That helps you and me out as humans to be able to see sort of what's going on in our program. Something else that would be really helpful is if we could iterate through these data types. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next. But before we iterate through our data, let's just take a look at something called a loop. Right, so I want to iterate X number of times. In this case, I'm using a for loop. Right, so for number in range 0 to 10, okay, I essentially want to iterate 10 times here. We're going to go ahead and use this print statement again. Okay, and I've already run this once, but we'll run it again here. This is going to give us the output 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 9. Interestingly enough, we start out at the number 0 here. Right, so keep that in mind as you're writing loops. Very common mistake in programming is something called an off by 1 error. Well, we forgot to utilize 0, right, in our list for our output. Okay, so now that we've defined a list earlier, we're now going to go ahead and iterate through that list using this tool that we've just developed, something called the for loop. Right, so if we remember earlier, we defined our list, and that's exactly what we're going to do. For number that's in, right, it belongs in this data type, in our list basics, we're going to go ahead and print that number. Okay, so we've got 1, 3, 2, 4, and -5. And frankly, if we scroll back up to check our work here, go take a look at list basics, which we stored a little bit earlier on. Right, we can confirm this to be true. This is exactly what we stored earlier, and we just iterated through every one of these. Okay, so the challenge for this video, now that we know how to store a list, and now we've figured out a way to iterate right? I want you to now be able to find the minimum value in a list. This is your coding challenge, and I want you to be able to find -5, which apparently in this list is in fact our smallest number. So we're going to create a function to be able to do that.